Hello everyone, this is R.S. Miller at the endtimenews.org, and today is November 23rd, 2012. Peace? What peace? War is still coming, and soon. According to an article in Debka, Obama's pledge of U.S. troops to Sinai next week won Israel's nod for a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire for halting the 8-day Gaza operation Wednesday night, November 21st, after President Barack Obama personally pledged to start deploying U.S. troops in Egyptian Sinai next week. He said President Morsi had consented to the incoming troops going into immediate action against the Iranian smuggling networks. This means that the Gaza blockade is extended and the focus of combat moves from Gaza to Sinai. Now, in another article by Debka, Russian warships in position opposite Israel. The Black Sea Fleet's Naval Task Force has been ordered to remain in the eastern Mediterranean, ready to evacuate Russian citizens from the Gaza Strip. Moscow used the same pretext as Washington, readiness to evacuate nationals in an emergency, to account for the presence last week of the USS Iwo Jima and two other warships in the East Mediterranean. Both flotillas are in fact on standby for developments in the Syrian crisis. The Iwo Jima has since moved quietly into the waters off Syria. Israel arrests 55 militants in West Bank. Israeli troops arrested 55 Palestinian terror operatives across the West Bank overnight, hours after a truce came into effect in the Gaza Strip, the army said on Thursday. A total of 55 terror operatives who were affiliated with different terror groups have been detained. Among those arrested were a number of senior-level operatives, the statement said, with public radio saying it included members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It said the swoop was related to recent terrorist and violent activity in the West Bank, which has seen days of widespread protests and clashes over Israel's recent relentless bombing campaign targeting militants in the Gaza Strip. The violence in and around Gaza ended at 1900 GMT on Wednesday, when an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire agreement came into force. IDF and Gaza clash, 1 killed. Post-ceasefire small tale of violence continues with a clash between IDF troops and violent rioters on Gaza fence, 1 killed. Post-ceasefire violence continued Friday with a violent clash along the Gaza security fence, according to AFP. Gaza residents say one local man was killed by IDF fire and several others wounded. There was no immediate confirmation from the IDF. Spokespeople confirmed that there had been disturbances and that soldiers had fired warning shots but could not confirm casualties. Gaza sources claim that the dead and wounded were a group of farmers. The dead man was identified as Abdahadi Kadi Anwar, 21, AFP reported. There have been 20 rockets fired since the ceasefire went into effect on Wednesday evening. Egypt seizes Grad warheads likely en route to Gaza. The Egyptian Security Service has seized weapons consignment including Grad rockets, the Egyptian press reported on Wednesday. Security force sources said a gang had smuggled the consignment consisting of 108 Grad rocket warheads and 19,646 rounds of ammunition into the seaport of Marsa Matruh, according to an Egyptian newspaper. The consignment was most likely destined for Gaza, but could also have been en route to buyers in Egypt's increasingly lawless Sinai. The news agency cited unnamed security sources as saying a gang of 3 Egyptian suspects fled into the desert around Marsa Matruh, leaving behind the weapons consignment after security services ambushed them. The security services suspected the gang specializes in smuggling narcotics, light and heavy weaponry, and ammunition from outside Egypt and selling them to clients inside the country, according to the report. Protests and clashes across Egypt as Pharaoh Morsi seizes new powers. Police fired tear gas at protesters as supporters and opponents of President Mohamed Morsi clashed in Cairo. Demonstrations took place in several cities throughout the country after the leader signed a controversial decree expanding his powers. Earlier Friday, demonstrators clashed with police in Alexandria, Egypt, as they protested against President Morsi. Casualties were reported at the protests, and Morsi opponents set fire to Muslim Brotherhood offices in the Suez Canal cities of Suez, Port Said, and Ismailia, state TV said. Thousands of demonstrators threw stones and chunks of marble at each other outside an Alexandria mosque after Friday prayers. Anti-Morsi protesters threw firecrackers at supporters of the Brotherhood, who used prayer rugs to shield themselves. Protesters both for and against President Morsi also rallied in the streets of Cairo, Egypt. Supporters for Morsi chanted, "The people support the president's decree," in front of the presidential palace, AP reported. The demonstrations follow a call by the Egyptian opposition to protest what they call a coup by Morsi. Patriot missiles expected to be in Turkey next month. Patriot missiles Turkey formally requested from NATO on Wednesday for deploying on its Syrian border for defense purposes are expected to arrive in Turkey in mid-December. Diplomatic sources said Turkey's request was approved at a meeting of the ambassadors of 28 member states that make up the top council on Wednesday, and the missiles were expected to arrive in Turkey in mid-December. NATO Security General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said a joint team would visit Turkey next week to conduct a site survey for the possible deployment of the Patriots. Meanwhile, Lavrov states that Patriot missile deployment in Turkey will lead to further regional destabilization. The Russian Foreign Ministry has expressed strong reservations after Ankara said it would request that NATO deploy Patriot missiles along the Turkey-Syria border. Lavrov iterated Russia's concerns about plans to deploy Patriot missile systems on Turkish territory in a telephone conversation with NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Anders informed Lavrov about the situation related to Turkey's request that NATO deploy Patriot air defense missiles on its territory. Lavrov reiterated Russia's concerns about the plans to step up military potential in the region and the proposal on establishing a direct communication line between Ankara and Damascus to avoid incidents. The Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement it published on its website following the conversation. Earlier, Lavrov used the theoretical metaphor to drive home Russia's concern over the increased militarization of the region. Our concerns are rooted in the Chekhov's gun syndrome that says, if a gun appears on stage in the first act, it will definitely fire by the third, he said. The emergence of weapons at a time when attempts are being made to resolve a conflict creates risk, not necessarily due to the scenario, but because any stockpile of weapons naturally creates threats, he explained. Any provocation may trigger a very serious armed conflict. We want to avoid this, he said. The minister stressed that Moscow understands Turkey's concerns about the situation on its border with Syria, where clashes between Syrian government forces and the opposition are everyday occurrences, and refugees continue to stream into Turkey. All this incites tension even in the absence of air defense missile systems, Lavrov said. Earlier, the Foreign Ministry expressed strong reservations over Turkey's request for Patriot missiles on its territory. Militarization of Syrian-Turkish border is an alarming signal, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Alexander Lukashevich said during a news conference in Moscow on Thursday. The diplomat advised Turkey to instead promote dialogue between Damascus and the Syrian opposition. We have a different recommendation for our Turkish colleagues. They should use their influence on the Syrian opposition to promote the soonest beginning of the inter-Syrian dialogue, he said. For the last 20 months, Syria has experienced a protracted conflict between a rebel opposition and forces loyal to President Bashar Assad. Some of this violence has spilled over into the Turkish territory. In October, Turkey fired artillery into Syria after stray shells from the conflict hit the Turkish border town of Akale, killing 5 civilians. Friends, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a U.S./Egyptian brokered peace plan on Wednesday, November 21st. Although Israel immediately halted its attacks on targets inside Gaza, the terrorists continued launching an additional 20 or so rockets into Israel without an IDF retaliatory response. The latest reports are indicating that the truce is holding so far, and that those powers that be have high expectations of a prolonged peace. But to be perfectly blunt, it is nothing more than a temporary pipe dream, a temporary reprieve from the fighting, and it does little to delay the inevitability of World War III. The hatred of the Jews and the nation of Israel will eventually overpower any voice of reason in the area. Israel is surrounded by enemies on all sides that seek her destruction and the total annihilation of the Jews. Although there are a few Arab nations that will actually tolerate Israel, they are unable to establish a lasting bond of friendship due to the fact that, in most cases, their citizens will start a protest, which can easily turn into a full-scale revolt if the government shows too much favoritism towards Israel. Israel is blamed for virtually every misfortune that befalls the Arab people in Gaza and the West Bank, and even those living in Israel proper. If the Gazans don't have jobs, it's Israel's fault. If they don't have enough medical supplies, it's Israel's fault. If they don't have enough food, water, or electricity, that too is Israel's fault. Even though Israel supplies Gaza with tons of humanitarian aid, including money and electricity, but just the simple fact that they are Jewish is ample reason to blame them. Talk about not biting the hand that feeds you. The number one demand from the terrorist groups like Hamas just happens to be the one thing that Israelis will not agree to, and that is to drop dead. Israel withdrew from Gaza some years ago in an effort to exchange peace for land. The hope was to give the Palestinians their own self-governed territory, a Palestinian homeland. Unfortunately, the people promptly elected Hamas, a known terrorist organization who turned the Gaza Strip into a platform from which to launch attacks deeper into Israel. Instead of turning Gaza into a landmark political achievement for the Palestinian people, they chose instead to use it as military encampment from which they could further seek the Hitler-like goal of the annihilation of all Jews in Israel. Hamas has likely never been interested in the welfare of the Gaza's population. Their actions show that they care little for their women and children, except where they can be used to further assist in the demise of Israel. Recently, there was a report of a man displaying a dead child in front of all the media cameras and claiming that the IDF had killed the child with a missile attack. The mainstream media sucked it up with great enthusiasm, airing the video of the lifeless body of the dead child and using every opportunity to spread the propaganda that it was the aggression of Israeli war criminals that indiscriminately targeted children and civilians. Images like these tug at the heartstrings of normal people, and that's as it should be. But the truth should also be part of this type of imagery. However, in this case, it was nothing but a lie. What actually happened is that Hamas soldiers were attempting to launch a rocket at Israel when it blew up and killed the child. So what's wrong with this picture? I don't know all the details about the incident, but it seems a little odd that a young child of that age would be anywhere near a rocket launcher in the first place. And if they did happen to wander into the area, one might think that some responsible adult would immediately move them along out of harm's way. Well, at least that's how we do it in America. This form of extreme animosity was immediately evident when Hamas, along with a significant number of the Gazan people, began to tear down and totally destroy any buildings and structures that were identified as Jewish. Even though some of these could have been used to strengthen Gaza's infrastructure, which would have made life easier on the people. The money that comes into Gaza should be spent on such things as water and sewage projects, education, electricity production, and in general, those things needed to improve the living conditions of its citizens. What it should not be spent on is training school children to hate the Jews or anyone else, buying mortars, rockets, and missiles, or teaching terrorists the proper methods for construction and wearing and detonating of vest bombs. Make no mistake about it, Hamas is a warmongering criminal terrorist organization and cannot be trusted. They intentionally target civilians, women, and children. They take every opportunity to display dead bodies to the media, all the while claiming that Israel did it. Even though it's been proven that in some cases the bodies on display did not happen at the hands of the IDF, and in other cases didn't happen in Gaza at all. During this latest conflict, various media reports claimed that as many as 160 civilians have died as a result of Israeli airstrikes. But is it true? Were they in fact civilian, or were they simply terrorists in civilian clothing? Now, I have no doubt that innocent civilians died in this battle as a result of collateral damage. But at the same time, I'm certain that the IDF did not intentionally target these unfortunate people. But if you listen to Hamas or their sympathizers, then you'll be convinced Israel is the real criminal here. However, these are the facts. The Gazan people voted Hamas into power knowing full well of their anti-Israel stance. Hamas launches unprovoked attack after attack on Israeli citizens. Hamas intentionally targets women and children in Israel while at the same time hiding behind women and children in Gaza. Hamas is well known for their lies and untrustworthiness. Just this year, Hamas has fired 1,697 missiles into Israel, and each one of them targeting civilians. 933 just since November 14th. On the other hand, Israel made every effort to keep civilian casualties at a minimum both on and off the battlefield. On at least one occasion, the IDF dropped leaflets over Gaza to warn its civilian population. Unfortunately, it also had the effect of warning the terrorists as well. The leaflet reads, "Important announcement for the residents of the Gaza Strip. For your own safety, take responsibility for yourselves and avoid being present in the vicinity of Hamas operations and facilities and those of other terrorist organizations that pose a risk to your safety. Hamas is once again dragging the region into violence and bloodshed. The IDF is determined to defend the residents of the State of Israel. This announcement is valid until quiet is restored in the region." And during those quiet times, Israel regularly allows materials and supplies to enter and leave Gaza, additionally providing them with financial assistance and electric power, all in an effort to prevent a humanitarian crisis which Hamas itself has caused. Just within the week of October 21st through the 27th, 1,108 truckloads of goods were transferred from Israel to Gaza. The breakdown of these stats are as follows: 384 trucks with food products, 75 essential humanitarian products, 10 trucks with medicine and medical equipment, 22 truckloads of hygiene products, 65 truckloads of animal food, 64 truckloads of clothing and footwear, 54 truckloads of ceramics and plumbing supplies, 351 truckloads of construction materials, 21 of electrical products, 9 agricultural products, 655 tons of cooking gas. In Gaza, during the same time period, exported 23 truckloads of goods, and 222 medical patients and their accompanying individuals crossed into Israel. Now I ask you, if Israel were in fact the terrible aggressive war criminals that Hamas and others make them out to be, would they do this? If the shoe were on the other foot, would Hamas? The problem with peace in the Middle East lies in its definition and interpretation. According to Webster's website, peace means a state of tranquility or quiet, a state or period of mutual concord between governments, a pact or agreement to end hostilities between those who have been at war or in a state of enmity. This interpretation is accepted by Israel and most of the civilized world, but in the Islamic world, it is not an acceptable interpretation at all. They have no plans to make any meaningful and lasting peace with the Jews, but instead they intend to have a world without the Jews. Their definition of peace appears to translate into the death of the nation of Israel, the death of the Jews, and once that's done, the death of the infidels, which is everyone else who doesn't submit to Islam. Even if they were eventually successful in wiping out all of their enemies, peace would remain an elusive dream. Just as they fight and kill each other now, it would only intensify until they have completely destroyed themselves. Hatred is evil, and evil cannot simply be turned off at the flick of a switch. The battle between Israel and Gaza has subsided for the moment, but the war between Islam and the West is not over by a long shot. Let us not forget that even though Gaza could have been the spark that ignited a global conflict complete with chemical and nuclear weapons, it could at any point reignite. However, it is not the main factor which has the world reeling. The number one issue and the most threatening to world peace and stability is Iran's mad pursuit of a nuclear weapon with which they intend to use to wipe out the nation of Israel and usher in the return of the Mahdi. According to a report by those who know, Iran is fast approaching the point of no return in its goal to achieve nuclear weapons. By most estimates, Iran will reach this point by spring or summer of 2013, although it will still take another 2 years or so to actually produce a bomb. It will be virtually impossible to detect their actions or to stop them. Israel has made it perfectly clear that Iran is an existential threat and they will not allow them to develop a weapon. If Israel holds true to their word, then they will be forced to strike Iran before they reach that milestone, which is the spring or summer of 2013. The other major concern for world peace is Syria. With the support of Western nations, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad's government is in the process of being overthrown, Syrian Free Army. This group is made up of fighters from various Islamic and secular organizations and/or individuals, all seeking to oust Assad. It's been alleged that a significant number of them are terrorists. Once the Syrian government falls and terrorists are in charge of the country's chemical weapons, there is a strong possibility at some point they will use them on the U.S. and the EU interest in the region, but the biggest threat from these weapons would be aimed at Israel. Because in the Arab world, there is no better nation to hate than America and Israel. But of course, Israel is more easily accessible than America. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no peace in the Middle East, and there will never be any lasting peace until Jesus Christ returns and sets up his kingdom. We are living in the last days, and the evidence of Bible prophecy being fulfilled is written in the daily news headlines. We are rapidly approaching the time of the rapture, the revealing of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and the Great Tribulation period. Are you saved? Follow the link below and pray the prayer of salvation with a sincere heart, and you will be saved. It is my prayer that God bless each and every one of you with ears to hear, eyes to see, and a heart to receive. In Jesus' name, amen.